Episode 1. The Stranger on the Road. The road stretched straight ahead, cutting through scorched fields and abandoned desert, making Route 66 both alluring and unnerving. 5 friends, Emily, Jake, Laura, Marcus, and Sophie, were starting a road trip from Chicago, armed with snacks, music, and a taste for adventure. They had no idea that this historic highway had witnessed strange stories few dared to speak of. The late afternoon sun cast a pale golden glow across the asphalt, and the wind whistling through the canyons created eerie sounds that made the passengers shiver. "Look, there's someone standing in the road," Sophie whispered, pointing ahead. They pulled over. A man in a gray cloak, his face hidden under a hood, stood motionless in the middle of the road. Hearts racing, Emily stepped out of the car. But as she approached, the man vanished. Only an old car remained, parked on the shoulder, so worn it looked like it had been abandoned decades ago.
Jake picked up a photo left on the driver's seat. It was old, faded, showing a smiling family. 2 parents, a boy, and a girl, all looking into the camera. The group froze when they realized this family had died years ago in a horrific accident on this very road. They quickly drove away, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Along the road, Marcus caught glimpses of shadowy figures flickering at the edges of the highway, too indistinct to tell if they were trees or people. Laura tried to reassure everyone, but Emily sensed clearly they were not alone. Night fell. The car's dim headlights barely illuminated the straight, endless road, while the shadows on either side seemed to breathe, moving with the car. Suddenly Sophie screamed, "I hear laughter. It's not ours." They pulled over again, examining the photo. Strangely, the faces in it had changed. The family's smiles remained, but their eyes were empty, staring directly at the friends. Emily grabbed Jake's hand, a shiver running down her spine. Determined not to stop any longer, they pressed on, but the road seemed to slow them down, every turn bringing them back to the same stretch of highway. When the car bumped over a small ridge, Marcus shouted, "Look!" Ahead, the cloaked man appeared again, walking like a mirage. He raised his hand, pointing toward an old bridge along the highway, the site of several reported disappearances Marcus had read about. Emily felt an icy chill run down her spine. They had just encountered something beyond imagination, an entity not of this world. The group accelerated in silence. The engine's roar echoed across the vast desert. But when they glanced in the rearview mirror, the man was still there, standing in the road behind them, a faint smile visible under the hood. One thing became clear. Route 66 wasn't just a road from Chicago to Los Angeles. It was a place where restless spirits beckoned. And now, they had been drawn into a journey no one could understand. That night, as a rest stop appeared on the horizon, the friends didn't dare stop. Each of them was silent, eyes fixed on the dark highway ahead, feeling as if the shadows themselves were watching every move. They didn't yet know it, but their journey had only just begun, and Route 66 was leading them into a story from which no one could escape. Episode 2. Red Hollow, the Abandoned Town. Route 66 continued to wind through barren fields and rocky hills as the friends realized twilight was approaching. Ahead of them lay a small town, Red Hollow, silent and still, its brick buildings covered in moss, windows layered with dust, not a single sound of life. The group stopped, curious but wary. Emily suggested they walk around the town for a bit, as the map indicated it used to be a popular stop in the 1950s. They stepped onto the main street, their feet crunching over broken glass and fallen signs.
Laura shivered. "It feels like someone's watching us," she whispered. They discovered an old hotel, its faded sign reading Red Hollow Inn. Inside, the air was thick with mold and dust. Each room preserved its old furniture, as if time had frozen decades ago. Emily opened room 7. On the table lay a yellowed journal, telling the story of a family who once lived there. The first page read, "The shadow people never sleep. They follow us everywhere." Laura glimpsed a figure moving on the staircase, but when she called out, there was nothing, just the blank walls. The friends felt as if the walls themselves were watching every step, every heartbeat. Marcus opened a window, and a cold gust of wind carried the smell of damp earth and something burnt, as if someone had just left the room. They continued down the hall, finding old, crooked photographs. Each one showed a family, a couple, a child, and all of them had mysteriously vanished. Sophie gasped. "The people in these pictures, they're looking at us." Night fell, and the group decided to sleep at the inn. But as soon as they closed their eyes, footsteps echoed in the hallway, along with faint sighs from room 7. Emily woke to see a shadowy figure flicker at her door, disappearing when she reached out. Laura screamed. Marcus ran over, but the group could see that no one was truly there, only faint wandering images, like lost spirits trapped between worlds. Before leaving Red Hollow the next morning, they checked the journal in room 7 again. On the last page, written in fresh red ink, appeared the words, "They are always watching. One wrong step, and the road will lead nowhere." As they drove away, a heavy weight clung to them with every turn of the road. Route 66 stretched straight ahead, but they knew the space around them had changed. The shadows from Red Hollow followed, and in some way, they had stepped into a journey guided by the lost souls who had vanished long ago. As the sun rose on the horizon, Marcus looked back at the town. Red Hollow appeared normal once more, but the friends knew what they had experienced wasn't imagination. Route 66 was slowly revealing its secrets, drawing them deeper into a spiral with no escape. Episode 3: The Old House on the Hill. Route 66 stretched straight ahead, but the space around it seemed to twist and shift with every turn. The friends, Emily, Jake, Laura, Marcus, and Sophie, turned onto a small road leading up a hill where they spotted an old, dilapidated house. Its wooden walls were rotting, roof tiles broken, standing alone among dry bushes. Marcus suggested stopping for a break, and everyone agreed, even though their instincts warned them that this place was far from normal. They stepped into the yard, overgrown with weeds, the steps creaking under their weight. Emily pushed open the front door. Inside, dust thickly coated everything, and belongings were scattered as if someone had just left. But what chilled them most was an old journal lying on the dining table, opened as if it had been waiting for them. The first page read, "They come on moonless nights. The shadow people spare no one." While exploring, Sophie noticed a large mirror in the living room. When she looked in, the reflection showed not only herself, but also faint, shadowy figures standing behind her, their faces distorted and lifeless. Laura stepped back in horror, yet the shadows in the mirror followed her, even though no one else was in the room. They split up to explore the upper floors. Emily climbed the creaking stairs, hearing soft, mournful sighs from above. Jake picked up an old photograph, naming the family who had lived here. They had vanished mysteriously over 50 years ago. When Emily opened a door on the second floor, shadowy figures flickered in and out of the rooms, repeating the exact events described in the journal. Time seemed to compress, their hearts raced, and the space around them warped unnaturally.
Marcus shouted when a bedroom door suddenly swung open and slammed shut, locking from the inside. Sophie and Laura tried to force it open, but an invisible force resisted every effort. The cold wind ran down their spines, carrying whispering voices that said, "Leave or stay forever." The friends realized that this house was no ordinary abandoned place. It was a nexus for lost souls, a trap manipulated by the shadow people to claim anyone who entered. Emily, keeping calm, reminded everyone to focus on the main staircase. Hand in hand, they walked slowly, careful not to look at the shadows lurking around them. Finally, stepping into the yard, the sunset cast a pale light over the house. The walls, the broken windows, seemed to exhale a cold presence, as if swallowing the spirits inside. Marcus whispered, "We should never stop at places like this again." They got back into the car and continued down Route 66. The highway stretched straight and empty ahead, but one thing was clear. The old house on the hill was only the beginning. The spirits they had glimpsed were still following them, hiding in the shadows, watching every move. Emily knew that this journey would lead them to even darker places, where reality and nightmare blurred into one. Episode 4: The Haunted Car. Route 66 stretched under the pale moonlight, passing empty deserts and jagged rocky hills. After their encounter at the old house on the hill, the friends, Emily, Jake, Laura, Marcus, and Sophie, remained silent, tense, eyes scanning everything around them. They knew something unnatural was still following them. Suddenly, Jake spoke up. "Look, there's a car following us." On the road behind them, an old, worn-out automobile with no license plate glided along silently. No matter how fast they tried to go, the car kept pace, as if it knew their every move. Emily grabbed Laura's hand, a chill running down her spine. "Who's driving it?" "There's no one inside," Sophie whispered. But when they looked back, no one was there, only the old car trailing them, quietly like a ghost. The group decided to turn onto a small side road, hoping to lose it. But whichever path they took, the car appeared ahead of them again, like an invisible phantom. Marcus screamed when the car suddenly appeared in the rearview mirror, just a few feet behind them, even though no road led directly there. Emily recalled an old news story she had read. Years ago, on this very stretch of road, an old car carrying a family had vanished without a trace. The horror of repetition gripped them. Every detail was playing out perfectly. The friends stopped the car and looked around, but the haunted vehicle remained a few feet away, engines silent, headlights flickering as if beckoning them. Sophie trembled. We shouldn't be here." Emily nodded, deciding to drive slowly toward the light of an old roadside rest stop. Throughout the journey, the car stayed behind, seemingly waiting for a single misstep to strike. Looking at the map, they realized they were approaching Red Hollow, the abandoned town they had just left. Emily felt a terrifying truth. This car wasn't just a random phenomenon. It was the vehicle of lost souls, a reminder that Route 66 watched their every move. When they finally reached the rest stop, the haunted car vanished, as if it had never existed. But the heavy feeling lingered, and the group fell silent, knowing once again that they had narrowly escaped, but not forever. Route 66 always had a way of pulling them back, and the old car was a chilling warning. The ghost on the highway was still following them, ready to appear at any moment. Episode 5: The Abandoned Gas Station. Route 66 stretched straight into the night, the darkness swallowing every trace of light. The friends, Emily, Jake, Laura, Marcus, and Sophie, drove slowly,
their eyes fixed on faint glimmers in the distance. They spotted an old abandoned gas station, its rusted metal frames and dusty pumps standing like forgotten sentinels. Marcus suggested stopping. It seemed like a good place to refuel and rest. But Emily's instincts screamed that this place was far from normal. They stepped out of the car, the air heavy and icy, wrapped in a silence so deep it pressed against them. Laura approached the station, brushing dust off the glass windows. Inside, the counter was littered with old papers, and on it lay a worn ledger. Jake opened it and noticed that each page listed the names of people who had once visited the station, and then mysteriously disappeared shortly afterward. Emily's hands trembled as she turned to the final page, written in fresh red ink. There, in bold letters, were the names of all 5 of them. We're being watched," she whispered. Sophie stepped back, but the weight of the place pressed on them, as if the station had existed for decades to lure wandering souls closer. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind swept through, rustling the pages with a sharp, eerie noise. Shadowy figures flickered past the windows. The friends felt clearly that not only were their names being recorded, but every step, every breath was being observed. Marcus shouted when he heard movement near the old pumps. "Someone is there!" But when they turned, there was nothing but darkness and piles of debris. Emily pulled everyone back toward the car. As they climbed in, the streetlight ahead flickered, reflecting their images in the rearview mirror. But these were not their own faces. Distorted, hollow-eyed figures stared back at them, as if sending a single, terrifying message. Route 66 forgives no one, and anyone who dares travel it will be remembered. The friends sped away, leaving the gas station behind, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Silence fell over the car as they understood one undeniable truth. Every step along Route 66 was pulling them deeper into a vortex of mysteries and ghosts. They were no longer ordinary travelers. They had become part of the terrifying story this highway was writing. Episode 6. The Desert Motel. Route 66 stretched beneath a star-filled night sky, but the friends, Emily, Jake, Laura, Marcus, and Sophie, felt none of its beauty. Exhaustion and unease weighed heavily on them, their eyes constantly scanning the shadows along the highway. A faint, flickering sign appeared in the desert. Desert Mirage Motel. They decided to stop, too late and too weary to drive any further. The moment they stepped into the lobby, Emily felt a bone-chilling cold. No footsteps, no sounds at all except the wind whispering through the cracks. The front desk was thick with dust, yet on it lay an old registration book, still open, listing the last guests from years ago. Jake picked up the book, and one final page made his heart stop. Their own names were already written, the ink still fresh. Laura stepped back, trembling. We shouldn't be here." But Marcus found a room key lying on the counter. No one could explain how it got there. They climbed the stairs, but the hallway seemed endless, shadows curling around them, like they wanted to swallow every step. Inside the room, everything seemed normal, until Emily looked in the mirror. Her reflection warped. The rest of the group appeared too, but with twisted faces, hollow eyes. Sophie screamed when the next door opened, revealing a flickering figure, but when they approached, nothing remained but darkness. The friends tried to leave the room, but the hallway shifted. Stepping out, they found themselves standing before room 7 again. A cold wind swept through, carrying a whisper. No one leaves. Anyone who dares to enter becomes part of the desert. Emily grabbed Jake's hand, Laura held Sophie's, and they moved slowly, step by step, following the faint light from the front door. When they finally stepped outside, the desert was silent, but everything had changed. Desert Mirage Motel no longer existed on any normal map, as if it belonged to another reality.
They got back into the car and drove on. Route 66 stretched endlessly ahead, but they all knew one thing. They had just emerged from a place not of this world. The highway was leading them, step by step, into its deepest secrets, where reality and nightmare merged, and there was no turning back. Episode 7: The Railroad Crossing. Route 66 led the friends through empty fields and gravel-strewn deserts, the night sky so dark that even the stars seemed to vanish. Ahead, they spotted an old abandoned railroad crossing, rusted tracks stretching endlessly into the darkness. The iron barrier stood upright, and the warning signs had faded to illegibility. Yet the group felt an unsettling presence, a chilling weight pressing from afar. Emily stopped the car, eyes fixed on the tracks disappearing into the night. Suddenly, in the distance, a train whistle echoed, a low, mournful sound like the sigh of trapped spirits. Jake grabbed Laura's hand. Marcus held his breath, and Sophie whispered, "But these tracks have been abandoned for years." Before they could react, an old train emerged from the shadows. No one was inside. No lights glowed from the cars, yet the wheels screeched across the rails as if alive. Emily felt an undeniable, terrifying pull, as if the train was aiming for them, trying to drag them into its world. The friends tried to drive across the crossing, but their car seemed to slow, even as the engine roared at full power. The barrier slowly descended, though no one touched it. Sophie screamed. Marcus tried to reverse, but the train drew closer, its metal shriek echoing across the desert. Emily recalled stories of ghost trains along Route 66, trains carrying lost souls, appearing in the dead of night, pulling the curious into a journey with no escape. The only way forward, they realized, was not to look at the train, not to let their eyes meet it, and to focus solely on their wheels. They pressed the gas and raced across the crossing. As the car cleared the tracks, the train vanished, leaving only the whistle echoing into the distance. Gasping for breath, they stopped. Emily glanced at the tracks where the train had passed and saw dense fog twist into a distorted face, grinning at them. A cold, mocking smile. "Those who are curious will be trapped forever." The friends drove on in complete silence. Route 66 stretched endlessly before them, dark and infinite. They knew their journey was no longer simple. Every crossing, every abandoned train, every derelict gas station served as a reminder that this highway led not only to Los Angeles, but into horrors they were far from ready to face. Episode 8: The Phantom Diner. Route 66 seemed to stretch endlessly beneath a moonless night sky. The friends, Emily, Jake, Laura, Marcus, and Sophie, were exhausted after a string of terrifying experiences. A flickering yellow light appeared in the distance, revealing a small, old-fashioned diner with a blinking sign, Route 66 Diner. The smell of coffee and freshly baked bread seemed to drift from the door, beckoning them inside.
Stepping into the diner, a warm atmosphere enveloped them, a stark contrast to the cold emptiness of the highway. But Emily immediately sensed something was wrong. The diner was silent, and only a middle-aged man stood behind the counter, his eyes vacant as he stared at them. Laura sat at a table, hands trembling. The man approached, handing them a worn menu without a word. Sophie tried to speak, but no sound came out.
Emily tilted her head and noticed that every dish on the menu bore the name of someone who had traveled this highway before, including Red Hollow, Desert Mirage Motel, and the railroad crossings they had just crossed. Suddenly, the images on the walls began to move. Old portraits of past patrons now displayed twisted faces and hollow eyes, watching the group intently. Marcus shouted as a chair slid toward them on its own, though no one touched it. The space around them seemed to shrink, the lights flickering, and whispers echoed, "Those who come here will not leave, or will become part of us." Emily grabbed everyone's hands and pulled them to their feet. They rushed toward the door, but the diner seemed to stretch the hallway, blocking their escape. Panic rose as they saw their own images seated inside, eating normally, yet with distorted, soulless faces. Marcus yelled, "We have to get out of here!" Emily agreed, closing her eyes and running straight toward the exit. When they opened their eyes, the diner had vanished, leaving only the desert and the faint glow of the highway. Yet the chilling sensation lingered, and the friends realized one thing clearly. Route 66 was not only leading them to Los Angeles, it was transforming each experience into unforgettable horrors, slowly making them a part of the haunted history of this highway. Episode 9: The Forgotten Cemetery. Route 66 wound through desolate fields where darkness was so thick it seemed to swallow everything. The friends, Emily, Jake, Laura, Marcus, and Sophie, were exhausted from their previous terrifying experiences. By the roadside, they spotted a faded wooden sign, "Forgotten Hollow Cemetery." They decided to stop, knowing they needed a brief rest, though Emily's instincts warned that this place was far from normal. Stepping out of the car, a cold, heavy air enveloped them. Old gravestones rose haphazardly, weathered and moss-covered, some tilting as if ready to collapse. Emily felt every footstep echo on the hard ground, and whispers seemed to drift from the graves. "Leave or stay forever." Jake approached an ancient tomb, reading the faintly carved name. Missing people from Route 66, some of whom had appeared at the places they had visited earlier. Sophie shivered when she saw a fresh, empty grave, the soil disturbed, as if someone had just left. Suddenly, dark shadows flickered between the tombstones, moving like living creatures, yet silent. Laura screamed as a large shadow lunged toward them, but when they looked closely, only the quiet graves and thick fog remained. Emily pulled everyone close, realizing one thing. This cemetery did not merely hold the dead. It trapped the souls of anyone curious enough to step inside. A chilling presence surrounded them. Everything seemed to move, and the darkness swallowed the light from their flashlights. Marcus suggested driving away, but as they reached the exit, new gravestones appeared, blocking their path, as if the cemetery was expanding, ready to swallow them whole. Emily closed her eyes, focused, and guided everyone forward. When she opened them,
they had escaped, back onto Route 66, but silence hung over them, and each knew that this experience would be etched into their memories forever. Route 66 stretched ahead, dark and endless, a reminder that every step, every stop along the way carried terrifying secrets, and that the ghosts were never truly gone. Episode 10. The Last Tape. Route 66 stretched silently into the night, so quiet that every small sound echoed. The friends, Emily, Jake, Laura, Marcus, and Sophie, were exhausted after a series of terrifying experiences. The abandoned gas station, the desert motel, the ghost train, the phantom diner, the forgotten cemetery. Each place had left its mark, haunting them relentlessly. As they drove down a deserted stretch, Emily spotted an old wooden box sitting by the roadside. Carved on the lid were the words, "The Archivist, for those who dare to listen." The group stopped, curiosity and fear intertwining. Jake opened the box, and inside was an old cassette tape. Marcus hesitated, but Emily pressed play, and a voice began to speak. "Greetings, travelers of the highway. If you are listening to this tape, it means you have opened the box, and you have entered a game I have been writing for a long time." The voice was eerie yet familiar. The friends recognized details from all the previous episodes. The gas station, the desert motel, the train, the diner, the cemetery. Described with precise accuracy, as if the narrator had known their every move in advance. Emily trembled. We're not ordinary travelers anymore. We're part of this story." Sophie glanced around, seeing their own reflections in the car's rearview mirror, but their faces were twisted, hollow-eyed. They suddenly realized they hadn't just been watched. The experiences they had gone through were messages from the future, sent by themselves, or a version of themselves, to warn them. The voice on the tape continued. "Route 66 forgives no one. Those who are curious, those who travel this highway, become part of it. No one escapes." Silence fell over the group, heavy and suffocating. Emily understood that the tape was not only a warning, but also a connection, tying together all the terrifying experiences they had endured. They had become a link in the endless nightmare of Route 66. When the tape ended, they looked at one another. No words were needed. They understood one truth. They could no longer leave Route 66. The ghosts of the highway had claimed them as part of its haunted history. Emily whispered, "If you are hearing this, you've already opened the box." Route 66 remained silent, yet the ghosts, the horrifying memories, and the unsolved mysteries lingered, waiting for the next curious soul to arrive.